71. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and distant rainfall as Margaret Thorne descended from the stagecoach, her gloved hand accepting the assistance of a weathered driver. The town of Riverbed wasn't much, a single street lined with wooden structures that appeared to have grown naturally from the surrounding landscape, but after 3 weeks of travel from Philadelphia, it seemed like paradise. "Miss Thorne?" A tall man approached, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sun. "I'm Sheriff James Sullivan." Margaret straightened, gathering her composure as she surveyed the man before her. His face was tanned by years under the western sun, eyes the color of the distant mountains, a striking blue-gray that seemed to miss nothing. "Sheriff Sullivan," she nodded, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." "My pleasure, ma'am." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being a native of these territories. "I've arranged lodging for you at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. It's the finest accommodation in Riverbed." A smile threatened at the corners of her mouth, which isn't saying much, I gather. The sheriff's expression remained serious, but a spark of amusement flickered in his eyes. "You'll find we're a simple town, Miss Thorne, but honest. Now, if you'll follow me, I'll help with your trunks." As they walked the length of the main street, Margaret became acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but a woman in her position, unmarried at 25 and seeking to establish herself independently, was practically scandalous. "Your brother's affairs are in order," Sheriff Sullivan said as they approached a neat 2-story building with white trim. "The deed to his land is waiting at my office. We can review the documents tomorrow, after you've rested." Margaret nodded, grateful for his efficiency. David's death 6 months ago had left her adrift in Philadelphia, where opportunities for independent women were scarce. Her brother's unexpected bequest, a small ranch outside this frontier town, had offered a chance at a new beginning. "I appreciate your assistance, Sheriff. David wrote of you in his letters. He considered you a friend." Something passed across the sheriff's face, a shadow of grief quickly masked. "Your brother was a good man. His passing was a loss to this community." Before Margaret could respond, the door to the boarding house swung open, revealing a plump, cheerful woman with silver-streaked auburn hair. "You must be Miss Thorne. I'm Beatrice Wilson. Welcome to Riverbed." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Margaret dressed carefully in a practical navy blue traveling suit, securing her chestnut hair in a simple chignon. The mirror reflected a woman with determined green eyes and a stubborn chin, traits her father had often bemoaned as unsuitable for a proper lady. Those same traits had driven her westward when society expected her to accept a marriage proposal from a man twice her age after David's death. The sheriff's office was a modest building of rough-hewn logs. Inside, James Sullivan stood examining papers at a large desk. Without his hat, his hair was revealed to be the color of burnished copper, cut short but still showing a tendency to curl. He looked up as she entered, his expression warming slightly. "Miss Thorne, I trust you slept well." "Surprisingly so, Sheriff." She removed her gloves, revealing capable hands that had never known hard labor but were determined to learn. "I'm eager to see my brother's property." "Of course." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. There are matters we should discuss first." Margaret lowered herself into the offered seat, noting the order and cleanliness of the small office. Like the man himself, it was unpretentious but dignified. "Your brother's ranch is 15 miles outside town," Sullivan began, spreading a map before her. "It's good land, fertile, with a year-round creek running through the north pasture. The cabin is solid, if basic." His finger traced a line along the map. "This is the main trail. It's passable most of the year, though spring rains sometimes make the crossing difficult." Margaret leaned forward, studying the topography. "And the nearest neighbors?" "The Jensen place is about 3 miles east. Good people." His expression turned serious. "Miss Thorne, I must speak plainly. Living alone on an isolated ranch is not advisable for a woman." She stiffened. "I'm quite capable." "I don't doubt your capabilities," he interrupted gently, "but the territory can be dangerous. There are natural hazards, occasional trouble with rustlers, and the winters are harsh." "I've considered all this, Sheriff Sullivan." "James," he said unexpectedly, "if we're to be neighbors, you might as well use my given name." The familiarity surprised her, but she nodded. "Margaret, then." "Margaret." He said her name carefully, as if testing its sound. "I promised your brother I'd look after his affairs if anything happened to him. That includes ensuring his sister's welfare. I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come west to be coddled. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I don't imagine you did. Still, I'd be remiss not to offer alternatives. There are several respectable families in town who would welcome a boarder, and Mrs. Wilson has mentioned she could use help with her accounts. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. I came to claim my brother's land and continue his work. Now, shall we ride out to see the property, or must I find my own way? For a long moment, James simply regarded her, his expression unreadable. Then he rose, reaching for his hat. I'll saddle the horses. The journey to David's ranch took most of the morning. As they rode, the landscape changed from rolling foothills to a dramatic canyon country where red rock formations rose against brilliant blue skies. Margaret, who had learned to ride in Philadelphia's manicured parks, found herself challenged by the terrain, but exhilarated by its wild beauty. James rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local knowledge. He was a natural horseman, moving as one with his mount. Despite her initial resistance to his protective stance, Margaret found herself warming to his quiet competence. There, he said finally, reining his horse to a stop atop a rise. Aspen Valley Ranch. Margaret drew her mount alongside his and caught her breath. Below them stretched a verdant valley nestled between protective canyon walls. A small cabin and barn stood near a grove of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. In the distance, a dozen cattle grazed in lush pasture. It's beautiful, she whispered. Your brother loved this place, James said softly. He had plans to expand the herd, maybe plant an orchard on the south slope. Margaret turned to find him watching her, his expression gentler than she'd yet seen it. You knew him well? We served together briefly during the war. Afterward, when I came west, he offered me a place to stay until I found my footing. His gaze returned to the valley. David had a way of seeing potential where others saw only wilderness. They rode down to the cabin, where James helped her dismount. The structure was simple but solid, 2 rooms with stone fireplaces, plank floors, and windows that caught the morning light. A broad porch wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of both the valley and the rugged canyon walls beyond. The last winter was mild, James explained as they entered. The roof held well, but you'll want to check for leaks before the rains come. Margaret moved through the space, running her fingertips along the rough-hewn table her brother had built. David's presence lingered here, in the books stacked by the fireplace, in the careful craftsmanship of each piece of furniture. How did he manage alone? She asked quietly. He hired help during busy seasons. Miguel Fuentes and his sons from the next valley over. James hesitated. I came when I could. She nodded, suddenly fighting tears. Thank you for that. I'm glad he wasn't always alone. An unexpected gentleness entered his voice. None of us should be always alone, Margaret. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of shared grief, perhaps, or mutual recognition of the solitude that had shaped them both. The moment lingered until a distant rumble of thunder broke the spell. Storm's coming, James said, moving toward the door. We should head back if we're to beat the rain. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Margaret took up residence at the boarding house while making daily trips to the ranch, accompanied at first by James or his deputy, and then increasingly on her own as her confidence grew. She hired Miguel Fuentes to continue caring for the cattle and teach her the essentials of ranching. The town's initial curiosity about Thorne's sister gradually transformed into acceptance. Margaret's practical nature and willingness to work earned respect, while her education and Eastern refinement brought a touch of culture that many secretly welcomed. Through it all, James Sullivan maintained a careful distance, professional, friendly, but reserved. He would appear unexpectedly at the ranch to help mend fences or offer advice on local markets, then disappear for days on end as his duties required. It was during one such unexpected visit, nearly a month after her arrival, that everything changed. Margaret was attempting to repair the cabin's roof alone, having sent Miguel home early as storm clouds gathered. Balanced precariously on a ladder, she didn't hear James approach until his voice startled her. That's no job for a novice in an approaching storm. She gasped, nearly losing her footing. You might announce yourself, Sheriff? He was already moving toward the ladder. Down, please. Now. The authority in his voice prompted her to comply, though not without indignation. I'm perfectly capable. Of breaking your neck before the first raindrops fall? He took the hammer from her hand. I've buried enough friends in this territory without adding you to the count. The raw emotion in his voice silenced her protests. She watched as he efficiently completed the repair she'd been struggling with for an hour, his movements sure despite the wind that had begun to gust around them. When he descended, his expression had softened. I apologize for my tone. You surprised me. As did you, she admitted. Though your timing is fortunate. I've been wrestling with that loose section all afternoon. A fat raindrop splashed between them, followed quickly by another. James glanced at the darkening sky. We won't beat this one back to town. Best get inside. They barely made it to the porch before the heavens opened. Rain fell in sheets, transforming the yard into a muddy river within minutes. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. It's magnificent, Margaret said, leaning against a post to watch nature's display. James stood beside her, his presence oddly comforting amid the storm's fury. Spring storms here can turn dangerous quickly. The canyons flood with little warning. As if to emphasize his point, a blinding flash illuminated the valley, followed instantly by a tremendous boom. Margaret jumped despite herself, and James's hand came to rest reassuringly on her shoulder. Just the storm, he said softly. But the warmth of his touch lingered even after he'd withdrawn his hand. They stood in silence, watching the rain until a sudden downpour drove them fully inside. The cabin seemed smaller with James occupying it. Margaret busied herself lighting lamps and stoking the small fire she'd laid earlier. He removed his dripping coat and hat, hanging them near the door. You've made changes, he observed, noting the curtains at the windows and the colorful quilt on the bed in the corner. Small comforts. She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. The life of a rancher needn't be entirely Spartan. David would approve. His eyes met hers. He always said this place needed a woman's touch. An awkward silence fell. Margaret poured coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the stove, offering him a cup. Thank you. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and she felt a curious flutter in her stomach. James moved to the window, watching the storm. The creek will be rising. We may be here a while. The implication hung between them, an unmarried woman and man, alone in an isolated cabin. In Philadelphia, such a situation would mean certain ruin to her reputation. As if reading her thoughts, James said quietly, I'll sleep on the porch once the rain lets up. Don't be ridiculous, she replied, more sharply than intended. There's no need for you to catch your death for the sake of propriety. Besides, who's to know out here? A smile tugged at his mouth. Half the town will know by tomorrow noon. News travels faster than lightning in these parts. Then let them talk, Margaret said with sudden defiance. I've endured worse gossip. His expression changed, curiosity replacing amusement. Have you? She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but something about the stormy evening and his steady presence loosened her reserve. After my parents died, I refused an advantageous match arranged by my uncle. Philadelphia society has little tolerance for women who defy convention. And is that why you came west, to escape convention? I came to claim what was mine, she answered. But yes, perhaps also to find a place where I might be judged by my actions rather than my adherence to social rules. James nodded slowly. The West isn't free of judgment, but it does offer second chances to those willing to work for them. He hesitated. Your brother spoke of you often. He was proud of your independence. Did he? She blinked rapidly against sudden tears. We wrote, of course, but I always worried he might disapprove of my choices. David understood better than most the value of charting one's own course. James set down his cup. He also understood loneliness. The rain drummed against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. In this strange isolation, Margaret found herself speaking thoughts she'd scarcely acknowledged. I've been lonely all my life, she admitted, even surrounded by Philadelphia society. James moved closer, his expression grave. And here, among strangers in an untamed land? Oddly less so. She smiled faintly. There's honesty here. In the land, in the work, in the people. Not all the people, he cautioned. The West attracts those running from something as often as those running toward something. And you, Sheriff Sullivan, what were you running from or toward? His eyes darkened. Both, perhaps. The war left many of us searching. They were standing very close now, close enough that Margaret could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar at his temple, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "James," she said softly, "what are you searching for now?" Instead of answering, he raised his hand to her face, his calloused fingertips tracing the line of her jaw, with exquisite gentleness. Margaret held perfectly still, her breath catching as his thumb brushed her lower lip. "I should leave," he whispered, but made no move to do so. "The creek is rising," she reminded him, her voice barely audible above the rain. His smile was slow, transforming his solemn features. "So it is." When he finally kissed her, it was with restraint that spoke of respect, yet with an underlying passion that sent warmth coursing through her veins. Margaret responded instinctively, her hands coming to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, becoming a wordless communication of loneliness recognized and perhaps, just perhaps, banished. When they finally parted, Margaret felt strangely whole, as if a piece of herself long missing had quietly slipped into place. James stepped back, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "I had no intention." "Nor did I," she interrupted. "But I regret nothing." He studied her face. "You should. Your reputation is my own to risk." She straightened her shoulders. "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to live by the same narrow rules I left behind." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the storm continued unabated, but its fury seemed to have diminished, as if it too had spent its passion. "What happens now?" Margaret asked finally. James ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture from such a controlled man. "I don't know. I've avoided entanglements since coming west. My position demands independence." "As does mine," she pointed out. "I didn't come here seeking marriage or protection." "What did you seek?" "A place to belong. Work that matters. Perhaps," she hesitated, "perhaps connection without possession." He considered this, his expression thoughtful. "An unusual philosophy for a woman of your background." "I'm an unusual woman," she smiled faintly. "Surely you've noticed." The tension between them eased. James chuckled, a warm sound that filled the small cabin. "Indeed. From the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach." They talked through the night as the storm gradually subsided. James spoke of the war, of the horrors he'd witnessed and the guilt of survival. Margaret shared the stifling expectations of her upbringing and her fierce determination to honor her brother's legacy. By dawn, the rain had stopped. They stepped onto the porch to find the world transformed, muddy but vibrant, with sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. The creek had risen but not overflowed, and in the distance, a rainbow arched over the canyon rim. "I should get back to town," James said reluctantly. "There will be damage to assess." Margaret nodded, suddenly shy in the clear light of morning. "Of course." He turned to her, his expression serious once more. "Last night was between us," she finished for him. "I ask for no promises, James." "And if I wish to offer them?" The simple question caught her off guard. "I would ask for time instead. I came here to build something of my own." To her surprise, he smiled. A wise answer, and one David would approve. He tipped his hat to her before mounting his horse. "Until next time, Miss Thorne." "Until next time, Sheriff Sullivan." As she watched him ride away, Margaret felt not regret but anticipation, of challenges to face, work to complete, and perhaps, when the time was right, a partnership of equals to explore. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the mist that clung to the valley floor. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, their peaks gleaming with possibility. Margaret turned back to her cabin, with renewed purpose. Today there were fences to mend and cattle to count. Tomorrow, perhaps a garden to plant. And beyond that, a future to build, one day at a time, in this wild, demanding, beautiful land she was beginning to call home. Behind her, James Sullivan rode toward town, his thoughts turning similarly to the work ahead, and to the promise of return.